Hello everyone, I hope you're all having a great day today, and in this video we're going to be doing a review for Zack Snyder's Justice League, which came out in 2021. And before hopping into the review, for those of you who don't know what this is, I should probably explain it. So basically this is the director's cut of the 2017 Justice League film, but this isn't like most director's cuts where it's just they added the deleted scenes in. This is much more complex than that. So basically, the original Justice League film came out in 2017. It was the sequel to Batman v Superman, which was the sequel to Man of Steel. Both of those movies were directed by Zack Snyder. So Zack Snyder worked on the 2017 Justice League movie, and from my understanding, he filmed pretty much most of the movie that he needed to. But there was a lot of studio interference. They were wanting to do some reshoots and that kind of stuff. But Zack Snyder actually had to step away from the production due to the unfortunate death of his daughter. So they replaced him with Joss Whedon, who directed the first two Avengers movies. However, Joss Whedon's style of directing is very different. He leans more into comedy. So the 2017 Justice League movie is 2 hours long because the studio mandated that runtime. So a ton of stuff Zack Snyder filmed was cut, although an hour of it was left in, and then there was an hour of reshoots from Joss Whedon. And because of that, it feels very inconsistent in tone. And Zack Snyder filmed everything in kind of a square ratio, and it looked darker, so they kind of cropped it and changed the lighting. And because of that, to simply put it, the 2017 Justice League movie is not very good. And I'll put the link for my review in the comment section down below of it because it is not a good movie. But there was a movement by fans to restore the Snyder Cut on the internet. They wanted the version of the movie that was 4 hours long, and it was all filmed by Zack Snyder. But it didn't seem likely that it would happen anytime in the near future, until the COVID pandemic kind of rolled around. And obviously since that happened, a lot of big blockbuster movies were delayed because people weren't going to the movie theater that summer. But in terms of streaming services, the number of viewers were going up. So Warner Brothers realized that they should release the 4-hour cut of the film on HBO Max. Since most of it was already filmed, they just had to do a few reshoots with Zack Snyder. And there was some work that needed to be done on the VFX, but since that was done on computers, the VFX artists could work from home. And in 2021, the 4-hour version of Justice League was released. And there's a lot of differences between this and the theatrical cut. Obviously, this is entirely directed by Zack Snyder. They cut out all the reshoots that was done by Joss Whedon, so only about an hour of this movie had already been seen, and there was an extra 3 hours of deleted / alternative scenes, and it added characters like Darkseid, DSAD, Ryan Choi, Volko, Iris West, Martian Manhunter, and the Joker in a post-credit scene. And even though the central premise of the story is the same as the theatrical cut, the way everything is executed is just very different because of the tone, the vibe, and overall, when it comes to this movie, I think the story is really good. It just makes a lot more sense than it did in the theatrical cut because they had to remove so many scenes. Whereas in this movie, they were just able to flesh all this stuff out. And the main villain, Steppenwolf, his motivations make more sense as he's trying to prove himself to Darkseid. And they even changed his design from the theatrical cut, which I think is an improvement. And overall, this is actually a really epic movie. The action is really good. And a lot of people said this is like the Lord of the Rings of comic book movies. And they're not really wrong. That's actually a really good metaphor. The tone is also an improvement over the theatrical cut. It feels like the other movies Zack Snyder directed in the DCEU. And I just like how seriously he's able to take this stuff. It's not lighthearted, although there are some jokes here and there. And I will admit, in the theatrical cut, there were a few jokes I actually did kind of find funny. And it turns out those are the ones that Zack Snyder filmed because they were in this version as well. So that just goes to show that he knows what he's doing. And to be clear, I really like the vibe of Zack Snyder's DC films. I don't get why he's so controversial. People act like he uses slow motion too much, and I really don't think he does. Maybe he does it more than an average director, but he's good at understanding when an appropriate time is to use slow motion. And just visually, the cinematography, it all looks great. And the costume designs in this movie is also really good. But let's talk about our main Justice League characters in this movie. First of all, you have Ben Affleck as Batman. He does great in this movie. His motivation makes much more sense than it did in the theatrical cut. And it just fleshes out his story more of him wanting to help after realizing his mistake in fighting Superman. And speaking of Superman, you had him in this movie played by Henry Cavill, of course. And it was pretty cool seeing him in the black suit. And in the theatrical cut of the movie, how they brought him back to life just felt so rushed. Whereas in this case, it actually just makes sense. You also have Wonder Woman in this movie, which again is just another character where her motivations for everything she does just feels more fleshed out. It makes sense. It's the same way with Cyborg. He was probably the most forgettable character in the theatrical cut, but in this version, there's just way more character development, and there's a nice dynamic between him and his dad, and he just has a really good character arc. And I like what they did with Aquaman in this movie as well. It just does a good job of establishing he likes to help people, but he doesn't really want to get involved with this team until later on in the movie he kind of changes his mind as he starts to understand what's going on. And then, of course, The Flash might have been the biggest improvement in this movie over the theatrical cut, where in the theatrical cut, he really contributed nothing to the story and was just there for comedic relief. And in this movie, he is the main source of comedic relief, but he also actually has character development. It establishes how his life is going and that kind of stuff. And he's the one at the end of the movie that saves the day by time traveling. So overall, I just think this movie is phenomenal. And as I said, since it's long, everything's able to be fleshed out more. Now, some people have complained that this is too long, and I think there are a couple parts of it where maybe some stuff could be cut, some shots, but in my opinion, it doesn't really ever get boring. And some people have complained that the post-credits scenes feel a little bit out of place, and I kind of see what they're saying. And it is kind of sad how they were setting stuff up that ended up just not happening, but I think they serve their purpose. I don't think they feel that weird. But obviously, if this was the version they released in theaters, it wouldn't be 4 hours long. They would have cut the post-credit scene probably and cut a little stuff here and there. It probably would have been more like 3 hours to maybe even 3.5 hours. Really, the only problem I kind of have with this movie is that there's a lot of CGI in it, which is just kind of given the nature of the kind of superhero movie it is. Some of it's pretty good and some of it's not so great. It's kind of like Avengers Infinity War where it had like a full range of good to bad CGI. But that's just kind of the way everything played out. None of it's really distracting in my opinion. But overall, I think this is a phenomenal movie. It's one of the greatest comic book movies of all time. So on the quality scale of 0 to 100, we'll give it a 98%. If you've seen it, let me know what you think about it in the comments section down below. And if you haven't, I definitely recommend it. As always, thank you guys so much for watching, and I'll see you guys in the next one.